Hey guys, welcome. We are back. We had a couple of weeks off there, a little spring break, but back and ready to go, raring to go. Took a little time to reconnoiter a little bit. We got some exciting stuff coming down the road. Working on the website, give you guys a little more content. Working on the blog, putting some new blog posts together for y'all. And we got some exciting guests coming up, starting with our guest tonight, Dr. Ben Bocchicchio. Now, I'll tell you two things about Dr. Ben before I bring him on. Number one, he's an inductee of this year for the National Fitness Hall of Fame, and we're going to ask him all about that. And just in case you think he's some kind of meathead, number two, he's got not one, but two PhDs. So he's a real doctor, not like those MDs that we bring on here. So we're really excited to talk to him tonight. He's not just some meathead. He knows a lot about this stuff. Really smart. I quote him in my book, My Unremarkable Brain, available now, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. Because reading his book, 15 Minutes to Fitness, was really interesting and really changed my perspective about some things. Before I bring him on, let me just say that even though he is a doctor, he's not your doctor, and you should always talk to your own doctor before you do any lifestyle or dietary changes. Your doctor, your nurse, your shaman, whoever you want to talk to. With that, let's bring him on. Welcome, Dr. Ben.
Hey, what's cooking, David? How you been?
Good, thanks. How you been, sir?
Not bad for an old guy. Everything's good on this end. I'm keeping busy. A lot of good projects, a lot of nice people, and doing well. So can't complain, kiddo.
Excellent. Great to hear it, man. Well, thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate you making the time. I think there's a lot of stuff that we have to cover, but a lot of ideas that people are going to be able to take away and apply in their own life. Folks, this is interactive, so feel free to make a comment in the comments section below. Say hello, tell us where you're coming from, and interact. And any questions you have for Dr. Ben, we'll leave some time at the end there. That said, that is oh, and by the way, did I pronounce your name correctly, Dr.?
Yeah, Bocchicchio. Yeah, you got it right. That's good.
Hey, I got it. My friend Rich bet me that I'll get it wrong. So Rich, you owe me coffee, you know. All right. Well, as I said, I quote you in my book on page, I think 235. I think it's like the second to last page here. The reason that it was so late in the book is that, well, for one thing, there's an idea that you posit out there, which I love, which kind of brings everything together. We'll get to that in a little bit. But also that I was kind of late in discovering you. I found you through Dr. Brian Lenskes, through his podcast. Right. And I interviewed him for the book. And then he led me to you. But even though I was late in discovering you, you're not late to this game at all. As a matter of fact, you've been in the health and fitness field and been in the low carb field for as long as anybody, right? So
yeah, just about 50 years.
Wow. So tell us about that. You know, in light of, again, the Fitness Hall of Fame, you're up there with the greats like Jack LaLanne and Bernard McFadden, Charles Atlas, all those guys, right?
Yep.
So tell us, how did you first, get involved in this? And
well, the story I tell is my father became a fire captain, but when he was training for the fireman's test back in the late 1940s, got a set of barbells, which were handmade. They were made by a kind of a blacksmith kind of dude. Huh. And they were in my basement. And before, it was actually a cellar before it became a basement. But when we first moved to Staten Island, I was about 4, and I noticed these round things in this bar. And I went to, play with them, and I said, God, these things are unbelievably, the density was a new concept. It was like, I can't believe that thing could be so heavy. But I was fascinated with it, and I was always like an exercise, and I was a jock. I played all sports at pretty high levels, not saying, the older I get, the better I was, but I played a number of sports at pretty high professional levels and stuff. And so I was always interested. I was always interested in the training and, and this stuff. So my father, told me, we're not going to lift weights until, you get to a certain age, then we're going to have to lift them properly and stuff like that. So I did calisthenics and chin-ups and push-ups and, crazy things, anything I could. And then we finally started to lift weights. He taught me real strict form and taught me about, how the body works. It was cool. I loved it, So, and as I got into sports and I started training, I actually became a little bit of an expert. Even in high school, the coaches asked me, you guys can't believe this, but in the 60s, in high school, very few athletes trained with, did resistance training, trained with weights.
Mm-hmm.
They asked me to set up programs for the basketball team and the track team, and I'm 16 years old, So I was always kind of good at it and knowledgeable. I was really fascinated to read whatever I could about the old things. So the interesting thing, I told this in the Hall of Fame acceptance speech, that set of barbells that I had that were handcrafted, were a set that my uncle, Tony Bocchicchio, who was a research scientist, he worked on the Salk vaccine, but he was one of these physical culturists. Back then, these were the guys that took vitamins and exercise and all that stuff. This is like in the 40s and maybe even 30. Anyway, his training partner was a guy named Angelo Siciliano, better known as Charles Atlas. And so my uncle, who was a biochemist, read my second doctoral thesis, and he goes, "Hey, did you ever hear about a guy named Angelo Siciliano?" I said, "No." He said, "That's Charlie." He said, "Charlie Atlas." He says, "Charlie and I got that weight set made that you have downstairs in your basement, and I loaned it to your father or gave him to him when he was going to do the fireman's test, because Uncle Tony was a little older." And I said, "I know all about Charles Atlas." So, and then the other part of my family, which was interesting, I think, is one of my uncles, Felix, was the trainer and manager for the heavyweight champion Jersey Joe Walcott, which goes back again many years.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I got to go to St. Nicholas Arena and the Garden and get real good seats, and I watched the boxers, and then I got to watch them train at the gym. And again, it was fascinating. So I went to school, and when I went to college, my brother was a Cornell graduate, so I applied to Cornell, got in as a math major, but then I went to Ithaca College across the lake because I wanted to be a phys ed major. So and then I started to study this stuff and train, do my sports, and so I read everything I could get my hands on, and I got into it. And so I went to graduate school. I met Arthur Jones, who developed the Nautilus machines, which were the groundbreaking machines that developed a machine for each major muscle group instead of having these multi-purpose jungle gyms. And I got to know Arthur pretty well and studied the science and all the mechanics that he was a very brilliant guy, a little wacky, but brilliant. And these machines were the latest thing. Everything you see now in the field of resistance machines were based on Jones's first principles. He was the one who actually started this stuff. So I got to know him pretty well and learn. So long story short about my development of the smart system, these machines were made so that they had what we call asymmetrical cams that would look like a Nautilus. That's what I named the Nautilus. And so he designed these machines so that when we have a strength curve, when we do a movement with the human body, you have stronger positions and weaker positions. And if you plotted that on a graph, you could make an isometric plotting, get a configuration. And he said he designed the cams on the machines to match those of the human body parts. So we move the elbow, the shoulder, the lower back, hips, legs. Okay. So I asked, how did he figure that out? How it was perfect to match what the resistance curve that the machine gave to the strength curve that humans have. And he said he went to a geriatric home and he isometrically plotted the strength of unconditioned, just purely anatomical old people. And he figured they wouldn't have any bias from a sports or a training perspective. They'd just be purely anatomical. So when he said he isometrically plotted this thing and came up with a graph to make the cams, I right away thought that the cams would be best used as close to isometric, which is no speed, so slow speed. And that's how slow resistance training across the board got developed as a system.
Okay.
Super slow burn, whatever. And there's so many people using some offshoot of that now. Perfect workout. I think there's a bunch of people using that basic concept, some better than others, to just make a comment. Anyway, so that's how I developed the system, started using it. I opened the fitness center in the factory building. And I started off and I had like 160 members in like 6 weeks. And at that time, there was no such thing as fitness centers. You had the gym, the YMCA and the gyms and the dungeons. And But
Right.
anyway, I did it, and it was a successful venture, and I liked it, and I got real good success. And so I became, I think, when I was 27 years old, the New York Times or one of those described me as the fitness guru, and I was like 27 years old. So now, almost 50 years later, 45 years later, people say, are you any relation to that guy Vince Bocchicchio who was? I say, yeah, that's me. That's me. I'm still around. So that's kind of the story a little bit, I think. And now I'm doing much more research, training, and doing metabolic health. So applying these kind of principles, exercise, nutrition, to diabetics, obese people, Alzheimer's. Interesting about the low carb thing, people came to me and wanted to get lean, and the leanest people I knew and worked out with and saw were bodybuilders. So I learned from them, and they were all before a contest. These guys were super low carb. Yeah. So I said, why don't you try to do what these guys do? And I knew a little bit of the science behind it. And I was sending people like 1975 to the pharmacy to get keto sticks, and the pharmacist asked them if they were diabetic, and said, no, we just want to check our fat, fat consumption, ketone accumulation, and stuff like that. Anyway, that's basically where I'm at, and so now I'm here.
Yeah, very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, a couple interesting things there. One interesting connection is that I mentioned Charles Atlas very briefly in my chapter. I call it the 100-year-old fad diet, because the ketogenic diet, first studies on the ketogenic diet happened in 1921, and here we are in 2021, 100 years later, and it's still considered a fad, right?
Yeah.
But Charles Atlas's name comes up because he was a friend of Bernard McFadden.
Right. So was my uncle. Yep.
Yeah. The old, so he was sort of kicked off the whole idea of fitness and physical culture and all these things, bodybuilding. Well, he was a big he believed in many things. A lot of things seemed a little bit crazy, right? I mean, he believed in walking around barefoot in the middle of Chicago in winter. But he believed in fasting for a lot of things. And so a friend of his was a doctor named Russ Conklin, who used fasting with his patients. He was a doctor of osteopathy, and he used fasting with a number of his patients, and found that for people with epilepsy, they stopped having seizures when they were fasted.
Right.
And he reported on this in the 1920 era, and reported this out, and it started to become the main really therapy for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Fasting. Then they said, well, what happens when you got to eat sometime, right? So a group of doctors noticed that Johns Hopkins noticed that if you started eating, but you started eating a high fat and low carb diet, the seizures would not return. So that was really the birth of the ketogenic diet. So it's sort of just this weird, connection.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I was trained in the late 70s as a therapeutic fasting expert or coach. I mean, I went to a fasting institute up in Pauling Health Manor. It was called Pauling Health Manor. It was on the Hudson River, beautiful place near Poughkeepsie, and I used to go there. I've actually fasted 10 days, but fasting there was water. Here was your menu: hot water, cold water, ice cubes. That was it.
Yeah.
But that was real fasting, and I've done it as much as 10 days, and I still do it once in a while. And I understand about all the principles of it. I was trained, professionally trained for that, and that's almost 50 years ago now. So.
Wow. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because fasting is another thing that's come around again.
Yeah,
kind of gotten big again. Yeah. And kind of comes and goes, but let me just bring up this slide if I could. This is the one that I mentioned in my book, and I love this idea of illness, health. Can you just talk us through it a little bit, like you did at the?
Yeah, you see, I'm kind of big in the the low carb USA community, and there's a lot of great people involved in that and things like that. And many of them are MDs. Some of them are bariatric surgeons. Some of them endocrinologists, some PhDs and stuff. But the doctors, the MDs, I mean, honestly, if you think about what their business is taking people from illness, diagnosing an illness, and trying to get them to where the labs seem normal or something.
Right.
So what I call that middle of the road, if that, speedometer thing, a fuel gauge, I'm sorry, would be in the middle. It would be, I consider that the absence of disease. Your labs are okay. You feel okay. You're not dying. You know, you don't need any super medical treatment, maybe a few meds here and there. But I think my whole thing is going from the middle of that absence of disease to health. And I think the aspiration, the objective for most people, I really think they want to be healthy. They want to have some vigor, vitality, longevity, you know, not just be absent of disease. So I came up with this little gauge thing. So that's the way I thought about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good way for people to think about it. So yeah, that's what metabolic medicine really is about, is the attainment of health and, you know, optimal, vigorous function.
Yeah, I love that. No, I love that because, right, you know, sometimes we think, well, I'm sick, I need something to get better, and we think of a pill or whatever it might be. But that idea of metabolic health, you know, just broadens it much, much larger. Now, that word metabolism gets thrown around a lot. I've got a slow metabolism. I got a fast metabolism. What in your experience or your use of it, help define that?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question, because I mean, a lot of people do throw the word around, and they're afraid of it, or they like it, or they want to do it. They want a faster metabolism, whatever. But metabolism, in the simplest terms that I can envision, is all the stuff, all the chemistry, all the pathways, all the shifts, the building up, the breaking down, the energy utilization, the breaking down of energy, all the stuff that really happens in your body that keeps your body functioning. So you have a rate of metabolism. So it's really the rate of energy that you're using. And that all goes into, what goes into that whole concept is what kind of energy we're using, how are we breaking it down, how are we storing it? And now, you know, in modern day metabolic dysfunction, how are we storing energy? We are taking in so much energy, and energy that really is metabolically taxing, meaning it's hard on the system. There are a lot of leaky parts of it that cause problems. So, you know, we're talking about an energy toxicity, which I think Dr. Ted Naiman, I think coined that a little bit. And energy toxicity, meaning we have so much energy that we don't know how to store it healthily and how to use it, how to store it. And then when we overstore it, how do we get rid of it and bring us back to that healthy kind of needle point on the fuel gauge, you know?
Yeah.
So metabolism is all the stuff, the pathways, the chemistry, all the stuff that goes on to keep you breathing, keep you moving, keep your heart working, keep your cells regenerating, keep your nails growing, keep your bones strong. I mean, you know, everything that happens is really metabolism. That's your body chemistry.
Yeah. That's really cool, because it brings together, and that idea of energy toxicity. I'm not sure I've heard that one. I know of Ted Naiman and his work, but it kind of brings together, there's this weird, in the low carb world especially, there's this sort of weird, you know, conflict between the idea of thermodynamics. You'll hear the word thermodynamics, meaning energy in versus energy out. If I take in 1,000 calories, I got to burn 1,000 calories by getting on a treadmill or something. But, you know, you say, you know, it's not that simple, right?
No, we are not mechanical machines. In other words, I mean, conceptually, energy in and energy out is a vaguely conceptually representative of what goes on. But the energy in doesn't mean what goes in your mouth is food and drink, and what comes out as energy being used. That's an oversimplification, a mechanization of a biological machine. Okay. So how I kind of describe it, in my understanding, is it's not the food that you take in, the calories that you take in, and the calories that you expend. It's what the food that you do does metabolically. What does it generate? What kind of pathways? And one of the things that it generates is fuel burning and storing. And the other one is, when you exercise, it's not just how many calories does it take mechanically to perform that exercise over a period of time, but what does the imposition of that load and that taxation of the muscle system and the support systems, which are all of the systems in your body, what's the load? What is the cost of that? So it's not what you eat calorically, it's what happens when you eat that which you eat. And that has to do with what the food is comprised of, how it's stored, how it's utilized, things like what does it do to your hunger? Now we can get into the psychological. This stuff. Okay, any of these metabolic disorders, if we think about it, obesity, diabetes, you don't catch obesity, you don't catch diabetes. They're not contagious. Okay,
Right.
they are behavioral. Depending on your environment and behavior, these things will go on that needle towards health, absence of disease, or in many cases, dysfunction or illness. Okay. So what happens, what does the food do to your chemistry, to your metabolism, to the stuff going on in your body? And for example, would 100 calories of brownies produce the same effect as 100 calories of broccoli? I think almost anybody on the planet would know that that's not the case.
Right.
And does 100 calories of walking at a slow pace correlate down the road to 100 calories of high intensity exercise done in 2 minutes? Or, so again, what the muscle exercise really has to do with muscle action. What is the muscle stimulation? What is the formulation of that concept and that mechanism? How long, how hard, which muscle fibers are you using? We got that muscle fiber chart we'll show in a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's how you tax that muscle fiber system determines what activity and exercise are going to do metabolically, what pathways they're going to instigate or start, and what kind of food you eat, the amount of food you eat, and the time that you eat it are all sub concepts of just eating.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're all critical.
Yeah. So we covered how much. I mean, let's talk a little bit about, low carb, or actually you like the word controlled carb.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can you give us a little bit, because we got all kinds of people on this. This is not necessarily low carbers on this. This is, just sort of regular folks. Can you give us an idea of why controlled carb is an important?
Well, okay. The reason controlled carb, you're really controlling energy. Okay. That's really the bottom line. So you can control, energy comes in the form of fat and carbohydrate. Okay. Mm-hmm. Protein really is not a main energy source. You can use it, but the issues become, and the manipulation is most efficiently handled by manipulating carbs and fat, all right, or energy intake. So since the modernization of the food industry and eating patterns has been inundated with basically sugary products, meaning carbohydrates. And when anybody says I've had a carbohydrate, all they're saying is I've had sugar that's just in a compound fashion. In other words, it's combined, it's sugar in a chain instead of sugar per kernel, okay? So that carbohydrates are sugar. Pasta is sugar. Rice is sugar. Now, is there other stuff in them? Some fiber and stuff? Yeah, okay. But those things are basically sugars. And so the consumption of sugar, I can't even remember the numbers. I know Gary Taubes had a bunch of this stuff in a couple of his books, but I mean, we consume sugar now at multiples, 5 times, some crazy number of what we did, 50, 60, 70 years for sure. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Not only the sugar, sugar, say from natural fruits and stuff, even though fructose has its own problems, but everything is sweetened with high fructose corn syrup, which is sweeter than sugar, which has an effect on your liver, plus has an effect on your storage and utilization of energy. So, these things are obviously becoming compounded. Obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, some forms of cancer, liver. Now, fatty liver is ridiculous. It's all mainly has to do with sugar, generally has to do with energy and how we store it and how we use it. So when I say controlled carbs, for most people, these are Dr. Ben's numbers over 50 years of experience in clinical observation.
Yeah.
I would say 80% of the people are better off cutting carbs, even though they could cut fat. And I think about 10% of the population that I've seen can successfully do a low-fat diet and get pretty good results with it, okay? It's a harder diet, I think, because of satiety, because of the drive. Carbohydrates are not only, an energy source, they are an addictive source of input into our brains, okay? So sugar is about as addictive as cocaine. Or I heard somewhere, or I read somewhere, multiples of cocaine. It's so hard. We are all, including me, brought up born in the 40s, but raised in the 50s and 60s. We're all addicted to sugar. Yeah. And restaurants know that, food manufacturers know it. So you would be hard pressed to find a product that's sold, that's packaged or frozen or prepared, that doesn't have high fructose corn syrup, some kind of a sweetener in it by some other name, sugar. And because it makes us hungrier. Why do you think they put bread at the table before you eat? Sugar. Okay. And then you're going to eat more. And it actually makes you more hungry.
Yeah.
Even though it sounds counterintuitive, I'm eating, so why should I get more hungry? Because it's triggering your brain to want that and to satisfy that urge. So that's why I think low carb, for most people, not everybody, or controlled carb, because low carb is relative. I mean, you see some studies even, research that are published studies where they have people eating 45% of their calories from carbs and call it low carb. Well, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Okay, that's really not low carb. So we can get into the minutia about definition, but certainly cutting carbs. And one of the ways that's real popular is ketogenic diets, and you can measure ketones. I think that's a fine way. There's a fine way to do it. I don't think it's the be all and the end all.
Right.
But if you're burning fat, which is what most people want to do that are too heavy, it's not like they want to lose absolute weight. They want to lose fat, most people. And some people, and it's going to result in a weight loss, obviously. But if you want to lose fat, you want to burn fat that's stored. And if you burn fat that's stored at a higher rate than normal, you're going to produce what we call ketones. And you're going to use them as energy. And there's a whole science and there's a whole industry based on ketones and ketogenic. And again, you don't have to get too deep in the weeds with that. But you definitely will be well served, in my opinion, by reducing carbohydrates and controlling them so that the reason you want to control carbohydrates is because we have hormones. Hormones are signalers that signal all the organs in your body to do stuff. The powerful hormone that we have regarding energy efficiency, energy health, energy problems is insulin. Insulin is a hormone whose job it is to hibernate, is to make you slow down your metabolism, to not use fuel, to retain water, okay, and not to move around much. I mean, it's also a growth factor, so it makes fat cells grow, and it makes, so when we take in carbohydrate, we must have insulin with it in some shape or form to help that insulin go into your muscle cells, into your fat cells, and where it might be needed, which is a good thing, unless you have too much of it, and you always have too much of it, and you always have too much sugar, and you always have a high insulin level, and then your body becomes resistant. Exposure to any element produces resistance. When it becomes resistant, you need more insulin to handle the sugar. And at some point, you need so much insulin, your body won't take it anymore. But now the high level of insulin promotes a lot of these metabolic problems, and it's certainly correlated to high blood pressure, heart disease, atherosclerosis, clogging veins. And so insulin can be nasty. It's a very powerful, potent, life-sustaining hormone. But at the levels that we are making it be secreted by the pancreas or produced are now overwhelming us in obesity and diabetes and Alzheimer's and liver disease.
Yeah. No, I actually just finished reading Dr. Ben Bikman's book. Why we get sick, and he argues that all these things that we're seeing big spikes in now, it all comes back to insulin, right?
Yeah, no, Ben Bikman is, I think, number one dude in the world with regard to insulin and that kind of energy stuff. He knows his stuff. If you listen to one or two people in the world, listen to Ben Bikman.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He's the third smart Ben.
I don't know about that. The third thing you mentioned was when we eat, right? What thoughts on that? I mean, intermittent fasting is a big buzzword these days.
Yeah. Okay, so when I was taught this stuff, medical school, graduate school, it was, didn't matter when you ate, it mattered how many calories you ate. But so we're finding out now that it actually does matter when you eat. So there are just a number of studies, and I'll represent them kind of generally, not to cite them specifically. But if you eat 500 calories 3 times a day, and the same matched group eats 1,500 calories, the same total 15 for the day, 1 time in the day, the people that eat 1,500 calories can lose weight and control their sugar better than the people who eat more often. Okay. So it's not the calories. So although calories have something to do with it, sure, but it's when you eat. We're finding there's more and more evidence to that, which I was not taught, didn't really suspect it much. but now there's real evidence, and I think it makes a difference. And it actually, and that's why they call it intermittent fasting, Dave. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was trained as a therapeutic fasting person. We didn't call anything where you eat one meal. You know, in the old days, we would call that eating one meal a day. Now it's a whole science.
Right.
Intermittent fasting T-shirts.
Yeah.
Intermittent, you know, so it's a whole industry. And intermittent. So then now they have foods that you can eat to mimic fasting. Okay. So to me, this is an oxymoron here. I mean, so eat so you can mimic fasting.
Make money off this, Doc.
Oh, of course. It's like taking, do this, buy this exercise machine and do it, and you've got your exercise quotient. Doesn't tell you how to do it, how often to do it, everybody wants the magic pill. I understand that. That's human nature.
Sure. Do you know, any of the studies really point to whether it's important to eat in the morning or at night?
I know a couple of gals here in Arizona State that have studied some of that stuff. I can't remember the lady's name. Anyway, but when you do observational studies, those studies show that the people who eat more at night are usually heavier. But we all know, and I remember Dr. Westman replying to this saying, does anybody know anybody who doesn't eat that much at night or eats a lot at night and controls their weight? And there are a lot of people. So, but I think those are just observational studies.
Right.
But no, I personally don't think, even though we can go into hormonal flux and variations and pulsing during the day, we could probably come up with like a perfect formula for the average human. And that same formula says if you got a foot in a bucket of fire and a foot in a bucket of ice, you're comfortable. So when you take this, population data and try to apply it to each person, it becomes really diffused into almost nonsense. So, yeah,
it might have been you who said that the average human has one breast and one testicle, right?
Yeah, no, the average human, yeah.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Let's pop over to the other side of this exercise. Now, I got a copy of my well thumbed through.
Yeah, I like that. You use that book, man. Good.
I have to say, I did a chapter in my book about I call it a taxonomy of bad diets, and I go through probably 20 things that I've tried over the years, and I sort of, it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, but I group these types of things. So when I first saw this book, I have to be honest, you got these beautiful models on the cover.
Yeah.
You got a title, 15 minutes to fitness. Sounds outlandish. You even got some before and afters here, right?
Yeah, well, that's the one when I was 25. That was before I got old. And then the other one, I'm 65. That was after I got old. So that's the before and afters I got.
You're looking good. You're looking good either way.
I'm hanging in there.
But once I started reading it, I saw, there's a really in-depth understanding here. There's a lot of science here. And particularly on the exercise side, this 15 minutes workout seems completely outlandish, but the key to understanding it for me was the idea of muscle fibers, right? I mean, most of us think of muscle, we think muscle is muscle, right? Here it is, right?
Yeah.
Don't be impressed.
But
this chart, if you don't mind my bringing it up,
yeah, no problem.
We can kind of talk through. Actually, there are different types of muscle within each skeletal muscle, right?
Yeah, different kind of fiber types, they call them, different types.
Okay.
Now, an interesting thing about this chart, there's a research exercise physiologist who's wonderful called Keith Barr. Okay. And he's done some, now he put out a thing, he's teaching an exercise phys class up in UC Davis, I think. Anyway, he said, does anybody have any information that would help me teaching my students? And I said to him, call me and I'll tell if he could, if I was teaching an exercise physiology class, and I have taught exercise phys to MDs and to grad students, if I was teaching them, I would put this chart up day one, okay? Because if you can understand all the intricacies of this muscle fiber chart, you know the whole science of exercise physiology, because it includes energy delivery, energy storage, muscle activity, and really exercise is just a manipulation of muscle fibers for a certain duration of time at a certain intensity, at certain intervals during the week, and probably a little bit of style mechanical input. And so as we manipulate these fibers, we get different pathways instigated, and we get different responses, metabolic, chemical pathways, responses. Okay.
Okay.
So to go over this real quick, kind of using a running analogy, the muscle fibers on the left side are the type 1, 2, 2A, 2B, and 2B. And they have different, some of them do 1 and 2 and 2. But and anyway, this is how I learned it, and this is simplest for me to explain. So if we're just hanging around, moseying around and maybe strolling, type 1 fibers come in. They use sugar. They use fat. They're the lowest, what we call glycolytic, means sugar burning, okay?
Okay.
So they burn mostly fat because right now in our system, fat is circulating from triglyceride to free fatty acids in a big circle and a cycle to keep our bodies functioning.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay, all right. So when we use these type 1 fibers, you see they're aerobic. They have a very low strength potential. They're very high in endurance. They're very high oxidative, means they use fat primarily, just almost exclusively. Okay. So you could, because they have this enormous endurance capacity, and they borrow fat at a reasonable rate. They're not borrowing at a huge rate. You can continue doing this stuff forever. That's strolling around.
Sure.
If I want to go and I want to start walking a little faster, okay, or maybe at a slight incline.
Yeah.
Okay. Those type 1 fibers are not capable of producing enough force at that rate that they need to do it. So they have to recruit upwardly to that type 2B fiber. So follow me.
Yeah.
Type 1 strolling around, type 2 walking up a little bit of an incline.
Sure.
So it becomes a little bit of a less of a fat burner, a little bit more anaerobic, a little bit more, a little less endurance, a little more strength. Okay. Now, if I want to go and start to run, I have to recruit the type 2AB fibers if the type 2 can't handle it. They will only recruit upwardly if they can't handle the load. But if we increase the load, they have to recruit upwardly. And then if I want to sprint up the side of a mountain, I got to go to type 2B fibers. Okay, so in essence, here's what goes on. Okay, there's a thing called orderly recruitment. These fibers have to recruit from 1 to 2 to 2AB to 2B. Up, they have to go that way. You can't selectively get one level of these fibers except for the type 1s. So that means whenever we're going up to the types that are down lower, the 2B, 2AB, the other fibers leading up to that have to be working as hard as they can. So in effect, my concept is, and I presented a big study on this, my concept is when we're doing this we're getting to these type 2B fibers, these are life or death, fight or flight, glycolytic, glycogen draining fibers. When we get into there, the other fibers are working as hard as they can. And all of the benefits that you can derive from doing those other kinds of activities, slow, long, lesser intensity, can be derived from a simple exposure to taking those type 2B fibers to what we call threshold or fatigue. So externally, when we get to muscle failure, that correlates to what we call threshold internally in the muscle system, which means what's threshold? It's the level at which you have made stuff happen irrevocably, irreversibly. It's that little slide I have where you're pushing a rock over the hill. Once it gets going, once it's starting down, you've reached threshold, get out of Dodge. That's why you don't need more than 15 minutes. And probably you can't stand more than 15 minutes. Even if you're a glutton for punishment, I've had major, well-conditioned, world-class, world record holder athletes exhausted in 6 or 7 minutes. That's not my goal, but it can be very taxing. But by the same token, I've got 90-year-old people that can do it, and it's relatively just as taxing. And they can get into those type 2B fibers. For example, if I have an obese, sedentary individual, I can have them do a wall seat, maybe a quarter or a half of a wall seat, not even down to 90, if people know what I'm talking about, back against the wall at 90 degrees. And in 14 seconds, they're exhausted because they've actually gone up the strata, and those type 2B fibers can't handle it anymore.
Right.
Then if I get a world-class athlete, I got to do some major stuff, but it's still in the same kind of time frame, 30 to 90 seconds, and I hate to be a number guy, but 30 to 90 seconds, you reach failure, you're getting those type 2B fibers working, and you're getting all the ensuing supporting chemistry going. Another concept I think, Dave, may be important.
Yeah.
In my book, it's the global and local effect of exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me explain what that means. When I'm working my bicep, okay, that's local. It's locally working that bicep. But as a support mechanism to deliver oxygen, to get rid of carbon dioxide, to supply energy, to use glycogen, blah, 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 okay, the whole system has to work. The cardiovascular system has to work.
Right.
the respiratory breathing system, the hormone system,
Yeah.
the nervous system, and then also the skeletal system is attached. So the muscle system is the system in your physiology and your body function that drive all of those other reactions, drive all of those other systems. It is the generator. Our hearts, our lungs, our nervous system, our brains would not be developed to the extent that they are if it were not for the impetus, it was not for the instigation produced by muscle taxation. We wouldn't need hearts that can beat, twice as fast, 3 times as fast, deliver 4 times as much blood, or breathing volume can go up, delivering 8 or 10 times the volume of oxygen we can at rest, if it were not for the taxation of the muscle system. The
Right.
brain would not have to function as quickly, as adroitly, in a concentrated manner if it wasn't for, trying to hunt down food to survive or running away from a predator. And that's all instigated by muscle action. So the muscle system is a very, very powerful, very productive, and very underrated, I think, metabolic tool, metabolic system.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the connection, right? If we're thinking about using exercise as a metabolic therapy, as a way of changing your the way you use energy, changing losing weight, all these different things that people want to do, living longer, brain health, right?
Yeah.
All these different things. Getting to using those 2B fibers is really the key, because that's really going to push all those other systems to
that gives it. So this whole system is based on giving you the biggest bang for your buck for your time and energy.
I like that.
And it's not like more is better. More can be damaging. More can be overwhelming. More can produce stress hormones, cortisol, which doesn't allow you to draw fat from storage. I mean, so and if you think about the anthropology of this development of the metabolism, if we had to go out and hunt every day and drag down a behemoth and then drag it and cut it and eat it, and then every day we had to run away from a predator, we would be dead after 3 or 4 days. We would have no energy. You have to. So our whole genetic experience was a lot of hard work, a high level of hard work, which is kind of redundant, but intermittently, so we can survive, we can recover, we can now eat the food, we can rest, we can be ready to go again. Yeah. If we did it on a daily basis, we would have become prey. We couldn't run, we couldn't hide, we couldn't think. Okay. So it's not something that is metabolically feasible or optional on a daily basis. The twice a week that I've developed seems to be pretty much a universal concept. Can some people do more? Very few. I don't care if you're a world-class athlete. And I'm talking about high intensity. Activity now is a different subject than exercise. Activity means we strolled around and walked about 5 or 6 miles a day as developing species, okay? And we strolled around at about 3.5 miles an hour, and we know that because even in modern day tests, 85% of all people, no matter their size or even age, are most metabolically efficient between 3.3 and 3.7 miles an hour walking. So it tells me that's how the herd, the tribe, the people moved around to get to where they were going.
Yeah.
Also, interestingly, at that same speed is the highest rate of cognition. In other words, if you go slower, you could probably absorb more information. If you go too fast, you can't absorb the information as fully. So it also tells me that the brain had to be working very actively to understand the surroundings, the threats, the advantages of places. So it's very much correlated and interesting and hardwired into our DNA.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the cool thing, because I like that distinction. First of all, activity versus exercise, right? Exercise is intentional, as you say, and it's an application of science, really, in the effort to achieve a metabolic effect. But it's such a simple workout. I mean, it's only seven or 8 exercises, right? Performed at a very slow pace, right? You use SMART as your acronym, right? Slow maximum resistance training, right? So I'm doing a curl. I'm doing it, very, very slow up and down, which the slowness, what's the advantage of the slowness?
Couple big advantages. The slowness produces much less force, and the force is now applied, or the tension is applied to the muscle and reduced from the joints. The faster you move, the more the joints come into play. The joints are the weak link. We don't want to stress the joints necessarily. We want to tax the muscles. So the slowness reduces kinetic energy or momentum and keeps the muscle loading. As it's loading constantly because of that speed or lack of speed, these metabolites, these byproducts build up. When they build up to a certain, what we call threshold level, the body, a healthy body, a reasonably healthy body, is going to respond and adapt upwardly if given time to recover and recuperate.
Right.
Okay. So it's mechanical, but it's also very effective metabolically because we're not allowing that muscle to rest. We are building up, which is what we want to do. It's like air in a balloon. We want to keep pumping. If every time we blow into the balloon, we let it out, but by going up fast and just letting the weight down,
right.
This is a kind of a futile situation. We may not reach threshold. We could reach exhaustion, but not threshold. So maybe that's intricate to understand, but it's the best way to be safe and then therefore have a lifelong kind of a habit of doing productive exercise. And it's also the best way metabolically to stimulate this high level of response and to recruit those type 2B fibers that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and this is a lifelong process. People say to me, well, Dr. Ben, how long do I have to exercise? To what age? I tell them, I think you should exercise until 2 days after you die, just to make sure you're dead.
I like that.
Exercise is a part. You cannot be healthy, in my opinion, without exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that too. One of the things that you told me, soreness, one of the typical myths. I went to a class one time that was, I won't give the name, but it was a certain brand name of thing. And it was sort of an aerobic class, but with weights, the instructor's up there and she's doing this and you're supposed to do this at the same time. I think they advertise it's 400 reps by the end of the hour or 1,000 reps or whatever.
Yeah.
It was.
Great.
I tell you, I was sore. Really sore the next day. And I thought, well, it must have been a great workout because I was sore from head to toe. Right.
Yeah.
But you say, well, not so fast. Right.
Yeah. I'll give you a couple of, Dr. Ben stories here. So when I first opened my place and we were going to work to a high intensity, I would have these guys come in New York, the kind of the guys that come in and they're he-men stuff and said, I want you to make me really sore. I said, well, that's not really the point here. No, I want you to make me sore. I said, if that's all you want, I said, I have a baseball bat in my office. I'll make you sore in about 12 seconds. And then, you can pay me for it. But that's not the point. Soreness happens almost primarily, not exclusively, but to a great extent, because we are stretching or disrupting the attaching system. Most of your soreness happens, and the sensory neurons are located in your attaching system. Okay. Tendons, the tendinous parts of the muscle. So usually, if you supersede that range of motion, if you stretch, if you and I, Dave, went out and played a hard game of softball now, we haven't played, in my case, in 30 years, and we ran like hell and we swung the bat hard and we ran around the bases and threw, from center field, we would be sore tomorrow like you couldn't believe. It doesn't represent productive exercise. It means we disrupted the attaching system. So the soreness is not an indication of anything except that we've stretched and you can do a yoga. Even a controlled yoga performance and be sore as hell because you've stretched the attaching system. It doesn't mean you necessarily correspondingly stimulated growth and that's, it's good exercise because it hurts. No. Is it uncomfortable when you're pushing to failure? Yeah. Your body wouldn't want to do it, unless you had some kind of thought about this turning into something beneficial. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for a short period of time. Everybody's capable of it. I have people in wheelchairs. I have 90-year-olds. I have world-class world record holders. They all do the same workout unless there's an anatomical, on a shoulder or back or something we have to work around. But in the same major muscle groups and the major functions, large muscles to small, because that global to local thing I was starting to describe and apparently didn't do it, is that when we stimulate these muscles, we want to get this global response. So if we think about, there's a term called HIIT, high intensity interval training, and all the studies show it's really great and it's beneficial. And I agree, it's better than doing long, slow stuff, okay, in almost every case. But the problem with doing normal interval training is that you get on a treadmill, you go fast and you go slow, then you go fast and you go slow. You're doing the same thing for 10 intervals, let's say, okay, and it is productive. However, if you are doing the same movement, the elliptical, the treadmill, the stairmaster, whatever it might be, By the time you get to the third interval, it is impossible to work at a high intensity. Now, you can work and it may be difficult and challenging and painful, but high intensity, remember my muscle fiber chart, is getting to those type 2B fibers. By the time you've done 2 or 3 intervals, it's very tough to get to those fibers again. They have not recovered.
Right.
So my interval training is, my first interval is with my quadriceps, my legs. Second is with my hamstrings. Then it's my lats, my big muscles in my upper back. Then it might be my shoulders, my bicep, triceps. So every interval I do is done with a fresh set of muscles, capable of working hard. Okay. And then my support system is taxed to a greater extent. And locally, I'm getting these local benefits, these enzyme changes, these muscle adaptations in my whole body instead of just some particular 2 or 3 major functioning muscles. That is why I think it's the highest level of the purest level of high intensity interval training. Again, biggest bang for your buck, 15 minutes, get out of Dodge.
Nice. I like it. I like it. And everybody's got 15 minutes, right?
Now we hope.
And the cool thing is that in the book, you've got different forms. You've got one with rubber cables, which I'm using now. Now that ever since my gym shut down, I bought a set of those rubber cables. You've got a set that you could, a version that you could do at the gym with the Nautilus machines or with the Total Gym exercise trainer. Yeah.
So stuff you could do at home, stuff you could do with a minimal amount of equipment, stuff you could do when you travel. You take a set of bands with you. You can apply the tenets of the system with just about anything. I mean, I have one guy that I train right now, and he has 60-pound buckets of cement that we attach to a bar, Olympic bar, and we do exercises with that. I mean, you can make it happen, okay? And the bands are really cool because they're movable. But if you have any kind of equipment at home, we can use it. The same principles apply. Are some more efficient than others? Yeah, but the bottom line is you get to that muscle failure under control, so it's safe, it's reproducible, and you can sustain this.
Nice. Yeah. We got a couple of questions in the chat. You have time for a couple questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm good.
All right, good. My brother logged in. Thanks. Hey, Pete. He's asking about keto shakes. Maybe just make this a general question. We see, keto has become very popular. It's become a boom.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of products, keto shakes, keto cookies, everything else.
All right. I mean, like you said, keto, there's everything. Everything's keto now. Keto sweatshirts, keto underwear, keto shoes, keto beanies, So the keto shakes, I mean, again, you have to be a little bit schooled and understand what is in the shake, because ketosis happens as a result of having a diet that's high percentage-wise in fat, and it can be indicated, and you can see the results of keto by checking your urine or your breath or your blood. Mm-hmm. And it's a good way to generally indicate that you're burning fat at a higher rate than normal, okay, which most people want to do. Mm-hmm. However, if you're just chasing keto, there are ways to manipulate that by drinking, oil, MCT, medium chain triglyceride oil, or throwing. So I don't agree with I don't agree, and I think there's logic to assuming that just pouring on extra fat so you can get this higher percentage of fat in your diet, and it may produce more ketones. There's probably not much of a question about that. Is in itself productive for what you're trying to do, because you could be just burning fat that you're eating and not going into your fat stores. Logically, you want to take stored fat and use it. And ketosis is an indication that you're burning a high level of fat. But understand there's a couple of sources of fat. The source we want to use is already in your body.
Right.
So, just eating fat and getting you high levels of ketones. And I don't know. So as far as the shakes, I think that's an open question. It's like saying, is meat good for you? There's a lot of innuendo in there. There's a lot of keto shakes. I don't know. You gotta watch carbohydrates, and for some people it's net carbohydrates. It's a whole other thing, or total carbs. Yeah. The real strict guys say it's total carbs. Whatever has a carbohydrate, if it's a sugar, alcohol, if it's fiber. Now I'm not that strict on that particular the fiber kind of thing, but let's say it's equivocal. We don't know for sure, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. Good point. I mean, I tend to lean toward whole food more myself.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
If you have time, if you have the ability to cook something, you're much better off cooking real food.
That's a great point you added, Dave. That I should have mentioned. But yeah, whole food. If it has one word, meat, cheese, eggs, nuts, whatever. That's probably usually generally a grossly good representation of the value of the food. Okay, and as long as the one word is sugar,
Right.
or just fat. But anyway.
How about this is my sister Leanne. She actually is asking about muscle fibers. Do we all have an even distribution of the types? Are there any and that is a kind of an interesting question. I mean, if you look at a marathoner versus a sprinter,
right? Well, that may be
yeah.
Even in a single body, your body, you have different fiber type distributions in different muscles in your body. Okay. And there are some people that have more type 2B fibers. They're more explosive. They can build more muscle. Yes. So that's genetically kind of dictated. A little bit training effect. I can get those middle fibers to be either more aerobic or anaerobic, a little more hypertrophied or not, and bigger or not. But pretty much you're born with that. Although usually the genetic potential or the genetic limitation is not the actual limitation in most cases. But there are some people that just have it, just have a better fiber type distribution for burning fat and strength performance and things like that. But no, the fiber types are actually different, even in your own one singular body, but they also can tend to be a certain way in individuals, no question.
Right. But I guess the second part of that question, does that affect the exercise plan? And I guess unless you're training for an event of some kind, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. No, I think what she's asking is, would you train differently if you have different muscle fiber types? Mm-hmm. And I would say, with the rare exception, and one of them is Nick Norwitz. You know who Nick is?
Yeah.
Okay. So Nicky's kind of freaky. He'll accept me saying that. But I really think I've been trying to analyze what's going on with this kid. I mean, he can't get tired doing a certain, like he can run the same speed that he runs for like a mile for 10 miles. Wow. And he can lift weights and not get exhausted at a certain level. So I'm trying to figure out a plan for this kid because he wants to get I don't think he can grow much in the way of fat and muscle unless we shift some. So no, unless you're a genetic anomaly, right. In the nicest way, Nikki, then the same system works. You want to recruit whatever muscle fibers you have in that order. And the type 2B fibers are still going to give you the biggest bang for your buck for insulin, to store carbohydrate, to keep your blood sugar low, to reduce the need for insulin, things like that. So it doesn't make that much difference. And I wouldn't develop a program specifically differently unless, again, there's a rare genetic situation.
Cool, man. Cool. How about, we've got two questions actually from Powie. I'm not sure, would strength workouts work just as well with getting into type 2B as much as strength plus cardio? And I think
whoever's asking this may have read some studies, and I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Okay.
If it's a test question, then if you want to develop strength, you do strength. And if you want to develop cardio, you do cardio, and the combinations are less effective, and again, than each one separately, but they're overall very effective. The problem is that the definitions of this aerobic and anaerobic, which is really what you're talking about, in the literature is awful. Okay, it's ill-defined. If I can remember some of my stuff, 1979, McCullough, and 1977, what was his name? Anyway, two brilliant research scientists defined anaerobic threshold differently. Different levels of lactate, different levels of muscle fiber recruitment, different levels of expired. I mean, so the literature is goofy, okay? And some of the, just like the nutrition, some of the nutrition science was goofy. The exercise science is really goofy. What I mean by that is it's bullshit. So, so the point is, if you get to those type 2B fibers, all of the other fibers have to be working as hard as they can. If we're talking about performance, then we have to specifically manage the recruitment of those fibers with regard to endurance, specific activity. That's functional training. But for overall health and for metabolic health, even now they're coming around even with Alzheimer's, they're saying resistance training. Because what they're really saying is these type 2B fibers really do this metabolic with the chemistry that we're trying to induce.
Wow.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but one other aside, this training system, this performance or this routine is much more aerobic than any aerobics you will ever do in your life. And aerobic meaning, what's the respiratory quotient? You can look this stuff up. The only time you're going to be what we call 0.70 respiratory pure aerobic, or which we never actually get to, is during recovery from anaerobic work. That is the only time you're going to get to that level. So the most purely aerobic you can get is recovering from anaerobic, high intensity anaerobic type 2B fiber work.
Right.
That's really complicated, but believe me.
So the most fat burning you do is when you're recovering from the sugar burning exercise.
Yeah, most fat burning you do is a consequence of changing the metabolic milieu. Okay, so getting these hormones adjusted a little bit. That's when you do your fat. You burn fat 24/7. You exercise for 15 minutes or an hour or whatever it might be in any case of or your performance. But yeah, you want to change the blueprint. You want to change the foundation of your hormonal secretion, but also when it happens and to what level it happens. And the best way to do that is to control. Insulin is a major control factor, and also control the muscle fiber, the production from the type 2B fibers of those enzyme shifts and things that it creates.
Cool, man. Oh, wow. She also asks, Powie also asks, what are your thoughts about reverse dieting versus strength training for losing fat versus caloric deficit plus strength training?
Okay.
Are you familiar with the term reverse dieting? I'm not sure that I am.
No, I'm not really, but I understand what you're saying. So
okay.
Dieting and strength training for losing fat and building muscle versus strength training just to lose body fat. Okay, so muscle versus building muscle versus caloric deficit plus strength training. So I don't understand exactly dieting plus strength training or caloric deficit plus strength training to lose body fat and one to build muscle. Okay, I got it. Okay. I think that these things are correlated. So the muscle building and losing body fat are probably produced by pretty much the same effort, the same mechanism. So you can diet. And in other words, she's talking about, I think, a caloric deficit as opposed to just strength training and losing fat and building muscle versus calorie deficit. Okay, so yeah, there's going to be some kind of an energy deficit if you're losing fat, and there's also going to be some energy accumulation in your muscles. So if these are my two choices, losing fat and building muscle, I think you can do at the same time. There's no question. I've seen it for years. Caloric deficit and strength training. Yeah, you can do that. You can try to. It will. If you don't do resistance training and you just diet, you create this caloric deficit. Let's say,
right,
you will lose traditionally 50% lean tissue, 50% fat.
Okay.
So you become a smaller fat person if you think you're fat and are trying to lose fat. Okay.
Okay.
That's what goes on. So I think the combination of the two is optimal. And if you want to lose, weight for a wedding, weight itself, and again, now we're talking about water and we're talking about fat and we're talking about muscle. I mean, on a scale, a guy my size, 200 pounds, can lose 3 pounds, 5 pounds in 2 days easily. And most of it's water. But
right.
That's not really our ultimate goal.
Right. I think that and she clarified reverse dieting refers to eating at your maintenance or more calories. So this is that. Yeah. And I think you've answered it. It's that age old thing, right? Can you actually gain muscle while you're losing fat? Some people, there's a myth. I think there's some bro science.
Yeah.
That says
they can happen. And the most initial levels to people, it happens all the time. Once we start to get to a very fine level, then some of the mechanisms for either or can be inhibitory to the other, and then you have to manipulate. That's where the expertise comes in a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, let me do one last question if you got a moment.
Yeah, no problem. I'm good.
Robin asks, what should I do now that I'm on the highest incline on most of my exercises?
I'm sure she's talking about a total gym.
Talk about the total gym. The old Chuck Norris. Did you train Chuck Norris, by the way?
I trained Chuck and Christy for an infomercial. Yeah. Nice. Cool. Both really nice people. Good folks.
There's a big thing a couple of years ago on the internet about how tough Chuck Norris is. So
I'll tell you what, he was the nicest guy, and he's like an old jock, and he hit his cues he was a very nice man. I mean, I liked him a lot, and he's older than you think. Chucky's up there, man.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah, I would think he's pushing 80. He's close.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. He's a sweetheart. He's just a nice man.
Anyway,
Anyway,
back to your question. Yeah.
when you're on the highest level on the total gym, you're probably on the highest level for your big muscles, like your squats and your lower body. So there's two things you can do. You can either, some of them you can put weights on, like there's a weight bar that goes through. Some of them don't have that. If you're doing, say, a squat or a leg press, you can do one leg at a time, or you can do what we do, David, and you can do a pre-fatigue wall seat and then try to do your squats. So we pre-fatigue, you won't need as much resistance.
Right.
Whoever this gal is, Robin, you can send her my email. You can ask me specific questions, and I can maybe answer it more specifically if you want. Not a problem.
Oh, great. Thanks. I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Ben. I really appreciate talking to you. And I know folks are getting a lot out of this. Folks, if you want to preview, first of all, if I can put up your website here 1 second.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material, and a lot of it is pretty much free on drbenbow.com.
Yeah.
But, just buy the book, because Dr. Ben needs a new set of golf gloves.
Yeah. Well, one note on those books, we just got the second or third printing into the warehouses. They should be on. They're not available on Amazon, the books, that Kindle is, but they should be on. I was told by next week the warehouses should ship to the Amazon distribution center, so they should be, say, by the 10th of April, they should be there in thousands. So. Okay.
Great. But yeah, and all your information is on the website too, if people want to hunt you down and get in touch with you, anything like that.
And by the way, if you email me or text me and you don't hear from me, do it again, because I'm old and I forget. Sometimes I just have so many, I don't know which I've replied to. So don't think I'm putting you off. I try to get back to everybody.
All right. Thank you, my man. Well,
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. Hang on just 1 second. I'll say goodbye to you off the air. If you don't mind. Folks, thanks once again for being here. Really appreciate you guys. Do reach out to me. This will be live. This will be recorded there on YouTube or Facebook. So thank you all for sharing it, for putting it out there to your friends. And but let me know if there's stuff you want to see in the future. More cooking videos, more blog posts, more guests, anything like that. Here comes my dog. He's about to bark at somebody. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.